Hello, everyone. This is Bobby Saxon, the government chair for ACT-IAC Health COI. I apologize, I'm a minute or two late, but as time would have it, my computers are locked up right now. So I'm on my phone if any of you can see me. Otherwise, welcome. And thank you very much for your attendance today. We'll give it about another minute, make sure that everyone gets a chance to get on, and then we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Okay, again, welcome everyone, and thank you for your attendance today. It looks like the number of joining participants has started to dwindle down some, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Bobby Saxon, and as you can see the face of Todd Pantesi there, who is the industry chair for the Health COI. We both welcome you today, along with the rest of our leadership team, and looking forward to a really great program, a program where we are bringing in subject matter experts with ACL to talk about a really cool topic. And I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to Todd, let him introduce our speakers and our topic. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Bobby. Bobby, thank you for your leadership as the Deputy Director for OIT at CMS and for being our government co-chair for this ACT-IAC Health Community of Interest. I've proudly served along with you as the industry side of that for the last 18 months or so. And I'm really excited about what we've been able to do here in terms of getting on a monthly cadence for some really great speakers to not just come and talk about high-level things, I'll call it generic technology across the federal health agencies, but really diving into complex, challenging, important issues around the mission of these agencies. And Scott and Stephanie, I was so excited that you agreed to speak to us today because the bit I've learned from you both and from what your agency does, what your Octave does at the Administration on Community Living, I think it's so important, and it's frankly an area I was not that aware of until I started learning from you what it is that your organization does and what you're trying to do to better the lives of the elderly, those with disabilities, and it's an important segment of our population that I just haven't thought about as much in recent years. And this community of interest of ours really does strive to not just learn about important issues, but also learn about important programmatic challenges and needs. And we're hopeful this is an opportunity to learn from you both today about this important work you're doing. And perhaps this channel through ACT-IAC to come back to you with ideas on technologies, things that are out there that maybe you're not aware of that are happening in the VA perhaps, or Defense Health or some other place maybe these folks might be aware of, to come back and just maybe there are opportunities to help you, or at least just drive awareness of your challenge and what you're working on here. I will not put everybody on the line through the pain of reading off formal bios. We provided this through ACT-IAC. That's out there. But I'll simply turn it to you both, and you're going to spend about 45 minutes presenting this to us. We're going to allow for about 20 plus minutes of Q&A towards the end. So I know that Scott, you and Stephanie will welcome Q&A, and then we'll wrap up with a little bit of a business meeting at about 1:15 or so, talking about future events we're excited about. One or two really senior officials from Health and Human Services will be joining us in future meetings, one in April in particular, and a really exciting project with the VA around a data initiative, a kickoff in early April. So please remain on the line after the presentation, after the Q&A to hear that discussions. And without further ado, Scott and Stephanie, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Todd. I'm Scott Cory. Stephanie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. I am Stephanie Whittier Eliason. I serve as Elder Rights Team Lead in the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services at the Administration for Community Living in HHS. I am the program lead on the project we're going to talk about today.
And I'm the technology lead, and we're going to be talking about how ACL has used machine learning, artificial intelligence, and largely available data sources to be able to look at the risks of adult maltreatment and how we may be able to use those to predict adult maltreatment. Stephanie, do you want to talk to the vision slide?
Sure. So I know it looks like there's a lot of items on the agenda today, but I promise we'll move through them rather quickly. We just want to make sure that we give you all both the background of why we're looking at this research question, but also why we chose the predictive modeling and AI and machine learning approach. Okay, so we wanted to start off with helping you to understand the perspective from which we approach this project. So the Administration for Community Living has a vision for elder justice, and we also include adults with disabilities in this vision. And the idea is that we are striving to help foster a comprehensive multidisciplinary system that supports older adults and adults with disabilities. So this isn't just social service programs that you get in the home, but we want to foster an environment where health services and public health services and social services and housing services are all working together to make sure or to help ensure that people can live where they choose, when and with whom they choose in their communities without the threat of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation.
And I want to add one of the things that I think human services frequently suffer from is a lack of investment in first program resources, but also technology and data. And one of the things that we recognized early on with, and Stephanie and I have been working together on elder justice issues for 8 years. One of the things that we've really strove to accomplish is to get access to information and to be able to help our partners at the local level use data, use information effectively to be able to address issues of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Back.
Scott's driving, so.
I'm driving, and you have to excuse me because you've got a truly technology challenged CIO who's doing this. So we want to share this way. We broke this work into 3 objectives. How we learn from others, particularly in the human service community, about how they've used data to be able to address issues of prediction. We wanted to also expand on work that's already been done to identify risk and protective factors associated with adult maltreatment. And finally, we wanted to use tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to answer a research question about abuse, neglect, and exploitation. I think it's important to note that we've shaped this in many ways as both a program initiative, a project, and a research project. That gives it a different character than a lot of federal projects, because there really has been an effort to try and think about both what we need to do, how we need to do it, and who needs to be involved in order to be successful.
So Scott, before you go on, I do just want to mention that objective 1, really, so to appreciate the value of that, adult maltreatment is 30 or more years behind what we know about child welfare and domestic violence and other forms of interpersonal violence, including bullying and teen dating risks. So it's important to understand that, because that affords us a great opportunity. So we're behind in knowledge, but at the same time, we have now been able to benefit from very cutting edge techniques to understand a phenomena, and we don't have to make some of the same mistakes or stumble across the same challenges that others have in other disciplines. So, adults have their autonomy. They have the right to make decisions. They have the right to make bad decisions. We're not talking about adults who are placed under guardianship or something like that. So let's just put that aside for a moment. But that's a real challenge in trying to get information about their social status, their health status, in any other kind of aspect. They are autonomous, independent adults. And so how do you understand this issue while respecting their privacy, independence, and autonomy?
And Stephanie and I are both available to talk about the dimensions of abuse, neglect, and exploitation at any other time. We could go on for days about this. Yes, exactly. It's really important. It touches almost everyone's life. And that's one of the things that makes this work for us so important. Anything we can do to try and reduce the impact of abuse, neglect, and exploitation is really important.
Okay.
Actually, we've gone over some of this in the previous slide. There's also another piece of this, which is, as an organization, ACL, if we're behind with regard to elder abuse in general, ACL is also behind as an organization, quite honestly, in the use of data to support program activities. This is part of an effort to be able to build capacity for us to understand how to be able to use data effectively, to understand how to be able to use modern tools like machine learning in order to be able to find potential solutions to issues that confront problems. So we're doing this not only for the Office of Elder Justice, but we're also doing this to build a capacity and understanding for ACL.
And the important part of this slide is that we are partnering with CMS on this project. They have co-funded the project, and they also serve on the governance body of the project. Okay, this one is going to be a my slide, a program slide. So, okay, great. So we find out some risk factors about abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So what can you do with that information? So APS is Adult Protective Services, and that's the organization that is authorized in every state to receive reports of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Every state defines who's eligible differently, and there's varying definitions of the terms, but APS exists in every community in the United States. So how can APS specifically use this information? So we and the field of adult maltreatment see a number of opportunities here. This can facilitate service planning, either at the state level or the county level. It can help target funding, hiring, generate new questions for research, as well as help us identify where there might be gaps in what we do. So are there groups that might benefit that we're not targeting? Are there locations? Are there types of maltreatment? So this has wide-ranging implications for the field.
So I would love to be able to take a poll, but we generally present to non-technical audiences. So the terms here, predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, in many cases are foreign to the audience that we're presenting to. I'm guessing that everyone's familiar with these amongst this group. Can someone chime in and give me a yes or no on that one?
Definitely yes.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
We'll skip it.
Okay, so these are going to be rather fast slides that we move through. These are highlights of what we found in related fields to adult maltreatment. Across criminology, healthcare, child welfare, others, really looking at predictive analytics to reduce recurrence or recidivism, but also to predict location, geolocation of where might we target services. So the uses are similar to what our objective was.
And we wanted to do this to make sure that we weren't having to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to look at related fields because we thought there were learnings from them, and we did in fact find some learnings from the work that we did. What is different for us, though, is that this is new ground for adult maltreatment. This is both of us.
So in the area of adult maltreatment, we did not find a history of predictive analytics being applied to this question. We do, however, we did find 2 recent studies that looked at the question about whether artificial intelligence can help us in this area. So we knew we weren't the only ones who were thinking about this. And in fact, Dr. Rosen and Dr. Burnett are also part of our technical expert panel and consultants on our project. So might as well corral the best. So what did we find in terms of abuse, neglect, and exploitation from the literature? So this is important because this helped frame, these were some of the factors that we were looking to confirm or get more information about with our project. You can see both at the individual community level, what were some identified or the most frequently identified risk factors, as well as for caregivers, what were aspects of caregiving that were found for those caregivers who did abuse, neglect, or exploit. And then for other perpetrators, what do we think we know about their characteristics that could put them at risk for abusing? Scott?
Yep. Sorry.
He's trying.
Back.
Okay. So for protective factors, there were no protective factors that were found so far to date to be 100% effective. There were potential protective factors that had been identified, and most frequently the concepts of social support, caregiver interventions, and education. And so those are important to understand in terms of removing isolation of an individual. But I mean, that sort of makes logical sense, but is that enough for us to be able to develop prevention programs or interventions? We're keeping all of these in mind, risk and protective factors, as we move on to the next parts of our project. If Scott can.
If I can manage myself. So one of the things that we convened early on in this work was a technical experts panel. This has been an incredibly valuable group of folks advising ACL and CMS on how we might be able to undertake this work to identify specific issues that need to be addressed and to help us shape work that we're doing in a way that manages the set of risks that are associated with any kind of project or research, but in particular, risk associated with use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's important to note that we went for a broad set of representation. Other federal stakeholders, federal data experts, folks who are working in state and local adult protective service agencies, academics, data scientists, and nonprofit organizations are all parts of our technical experts panel. They will continue to be part of our technical experts panel. And honestly, I think one of the most valuable things that I've learned is that when you're dealing with technology issues that broadly address issues of data and tools like artificial intelligence, having a group like this mitigates against some of the issues that are arising regarding the impact of bias on machine learning, on the issues that arise when data scientists may not be informed of subject matter expertise. Our technical experts panel has been able to correct potential issues before they became part of the results of the work that we've done.
That's key. What Scott just mentioned is that we had this TEP established before we decided on our actual research question, which we're going to get to in the next slide. And that is because from the very beginning, we wanted to make sure we were considering all factors and that we weren't going down any sort of fallacy in terms of understanding the issue of adult maltreatment. So the research question that we decided on in terms of an experiment as our first foray into using machine learning and artificial intelligence was what community, and we're using county, level characteristics predict adult maltreatment, neglect, and exploitation and lead to adult protective services, service system engagement and involvement. And the research question, as you'll see as we move on, really is informed by the availability of data that we had for this first phase of the project.
And as I think all of us know, and it's becoming more and more actualized, data is really critical to being able to move these kinds of initiatives along. In our case, we were trying to identify data sets that specifically looked at what information was available about abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We were also looking at other data sets that might include information about potential risk factors. We chose to develop an inventory of data sets that were used by all members of the team to potentially identify which ones had the greatest value. And we were prioritizing that based on a set of criteria: what was publicly available, what was available for the county level, information that was population-wide, and also information that was available to compare to a source of information that we have from our system, NAMERS, the National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System. That's critical to understand because that was key. NAMERS allows us to know where cases of abuse, neglect, and exploitation have been reported and have the resolution of those cases. It's work that Stephanie and I and others have done over the last 6 years that for the first time gives us national information about abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And in order to be able to do this work, that was a foundational set of data that we would be looking at. Do you want to do this or do you want me to do this?
You can be quicker about it.
Okay, so one of the, when we talk about NAMERS being a key data source, this collects information on a voluntary basis from state adult protective service agencies. We worked very, very, very closely with states to have them say to us, this is the information we would be able to provide to you with quality and with reasonable quality and reasonable accuracy without burden, because unlike some other federal data collections on abuse, neglect, and exploitation of children, we haven't been able to fund state APS agencies to provide that information. We've provided ways to encourage them to do that, but the submission of data to NAMERS is voluntary. And that means that there's some benefits to that, and there's some limitations to that. All of the states contribute. Not all of the states contribute all of the information. So we looked at information that we call case component data. That's information about the specific instance of an individual reporting abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And we have an understanding from that of what the outcomes of that are, whether that report leads to the state and local APS taking that case up and working through to resolution of whether or not abuse, neglect, and exploitation occurred, or whether or not they set that aside. So this allowed us to focus on instances where we have verified cases of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Stephanie, do you want to add anything?
Mm-mm.
We also sought additional data sources that had county level information. The level of geographic specificity that we asked for in neighbors is county level for a variety of reasons. Because in rural instances, an individual reporting at a zip code level is likely to be essentially identifiable. We wish to maintain as little personally identifiable information in neighbors as possible. That was also a key way that we were able to get agreement from the states to submit that information. So we had a limitation. Our geographical unit is county. So we had to look for data sources that had county level information about that. It includes the American Community Survey, area health resource files, county health rankings, consumer complaint data, IRS 990 information, and information from USDA.
So quickly, the reason that we looked at some of these other data sets is that it did provide information about what might be going on in communities that speak to some of the risk factors. So food security, what nonprofits are in your area, et cetera.
Just to reiterate one more time, that consideration of what data was available and its characteristics and qualities was really critical to the work that we did for PRAM. It also influenced significantly the development of the algorithm that we used. We took a very stepwise and very thoughtful approach to this. As we've discussed, we were really concerned about sources of data. There is an additional step of ensuring that the data was clean to allow homogeneity of the data. We chose wisely what kinds of machine learning algorithms we would use to be able to parse the data for potential risks. We spent time with having our subject matter experts and data scientists review the result of the model and the algorithms. There were adjustments made through that process that really ultimately led to results that we had confidence in. And finally, the last step was using data visualization tools to make the information better understandable to folks who weren't statisticians, who weren't data scientists, and who were looking for results from this work that could be easily understood by professionals, but who were professionals who might not have detailed knowledge of statistics, data science, evaluation, a number of other disciplines. So again, hammering home, the quality of the data that we used had an impact on the accuracy of the results. Transparency of who was involved with designing the algorithm had an impact on what the kind of training of the staff who oversaw the predictive algorithms were involved. We sought to control implicit and systemic bias in the data, and we tried to account for that in the analysis we did of the algorithms and the results it provided. We need to take a moment to acknowledge the folks who worked with us on this project. BCT Partners, who are one of our contractors, were heavily involved in helping us set up the machine learning and artificial intelligence tools used. They have prior experience in addressing the use of those kinds of tools in social science and had a deep understanding of social justice and equity in the models that they developed. We learned from them and from others that this was not a black box approach. the machine learning that was taking place was not just throwing data in and throwing tools at it and looking at results. There was really careful consideration to see at every step whether or not we were introducing bias, and to look for that as a result. That and I this is being heard a lot. We're a social service organization that serves populations that experience disparities. Older adults and people with disabilities have a tremendous experience of health disparities. And many of the folks that we serve are, fall into, are persons of color, are women, live in rural environments, or live in impacted urban environments where resources may not be available. We know from other examples that if you use black box technique, you can inadvertently impact results because of those issues. We wanted to make sure that we were not doing that. We also used Microsoft as essentially a peer review group. We had them look at the work that PCT was proposing. We had them review it for accuracy. We had them look at the tools that they were proposing and using. And Microsoft were an incredibly valuable, how do you want to say, I wouldn't say backstop. I'm not a data scientist. I did research 40 years ago when I was an undergraduate. And have continued to have an interest in the use of data, but I don't have the most modern knowledge of this. Stephanie has done graduate research, but she doesn't have that experience of current things. We needed some organization to provide us guidance. Microsoft stepped in, served well in doing that. So we looked at a number of different levels here. One of the things that people always ask when we go through this is, did you look at individuals? Yes, we did, but because of some of the constraints of data that we have, our focus was on geographical areas. And specifically in this work, we focused on 11 states that we had case component data from NAMers on, that had a high enough level of data quality and data completeness that would allow us to be able to do the work that we needed to do. We worked at this, we did not consider the state level because the results weren't going to be granular enough. And we, predicting risk at a state level wasn't likely to lead to the ability for state or local APS to be able to target results of this work in terms of how they might change their practices. We were not able to go down to the census tract level, which is frequently the level of geography that is used for this kind of work. As I mentioned before, we don't collect census tract data in NAMers at this time because of the initial reluctance of states to provide us information. Stephanie and I are working to begin revision of the NAMers data model. One of the questions that we have for states is, would you be willing to provide us census tract information going forward? That's in part informed by the work that we did here.
Okay, I'm gonna step in a little bit here. So what metric are we going to predict? Well, the research question, if you recall, was the rate of APS engagement. However, there were some challenges to actually predict that with the data sources that we have. There was a lot of variability. So what we asked was, is there a change in the growth rate of abuse, neglect, and exploitation over time? And if there is a change, could it be explained by some of the community factors that we were looking at? You can see that this chart right here is not across the years. This is a 1-year snapshot of the state on the left with the smallest change to the state on the far right with the largest. So you can see that we don't really have a, oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? good average, let's say. So we're going to look at each one, the growth rate for each of the states that we looked at over time, see if that changed, and then see if any of those other identified factors might have been a reason. So you'll see that explained on the next slide, actually. Okay, where to 2016 is the first year that we have data from NAMers. And we had data at the time, fiscal year 2018. So that's 3 years of data. And so what we wanted to see is if the rate went up or down and what could it have been explained by NAMers or the community data sets. Always understanding that sometimes your rate of change could just be your reporting's better, your tracking is better, your people are more aware of what you're doing. So, you know, we understood the variations in the approach, but we wanted to there. Okay,
And so
quantifying quickly.
And so what we found is that there are in fact predictive factors that were present in those data sets that predicted with different levels of confidence the prevalence of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. The results that we got weren't entirely what we expected. The greatest prediction, and prediction is understood as R naught. This is basic statistics. It's how closely does the predictive factor reflect the actual data. For that, we found that young people with disabilities, the risk factors that we identified predicted the rate of change with the greatest. It was the greatest set of oh God, Stephanie, help me please.
Yes, no problem. So the factors that we looked at, in 64% of the individuals that we had data on from APS, the community factors that we looked at explained the change in the rate of growth of abuse, neglect, and exploitation in that state. And then conversely, for older adults, the community factors we looked at did not seem to explain the experience of abuse, neglect, and or the change in the rate of growth of abuse, neglect, and exploitation for older adults in those states. And then with number 1 and 2, you know, half, so it's still a little unclear if it could be explained or not. The numbers aren't great enough. The difference isn't great enough. But if we go on to the next slide, I think that this is what we find most interesting. So one of the things to recall is that unfortunately, we don't know what about employment, the availability of employment, the unavailability of employment, underemployment, what about housing, for instance, availability, not availability, what kind of housing. So we don't know in which direction these factors affect abuse, neglect. What we do know is that we need to look at these more. And this is really groundbreaking because no one in abuse, neglect, and exploitation research has really looked at community factors in this way to try to understand the prevalence of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. In the group of adults with disabilities where we saw the largest number of the factors explaining, it really came down to housing and income. So that would be a very good area of research and further investigation, is to understand what about housing and what about income impacts the change, the rate of growth, the experience of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of adults with disabilities. And then also we saw mental health and social isolation with older adults. And the question is, you know, in what way did mental health and social isolation affect the experience or predict the experience? What can we understand about that? So again, this is groundbreaking, honestly, that we have for the first time identified factors outside of the dyad, right? The victim and the perpetrator, to try to explain this issue and to get a community response developed around abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Okay, so some of this I've alluded to. So what are the implications and the opportunities of what we've just found? It allows for conducting some rapid studies. We can add some additional and historical time data sets to try to tease out the impact of those factors that we talked about. It also encourages more research into looking at the community level factors for adult maltreatment. And it also begins to help us to, look at whether we want to invest more or less or differently in any series of community policies or programs or initiatives. And eventually, the plan, the hope, is that information from this type of research will help us make better funding decisions, more targeted funding decisions, be able to identify areas of greatest need or areas of that where we have the largest gaps, so that we can again close the holes in those nets of protective factors.
And to amplify and go beyond what Stephanie was saying, these findings and the implications and opportunities exist at the federal level. That we're a grant making agency. Obviously, some of the findings would have an impact on how we might choose to allocate our grants through formulas. But it also has an impact at the state and local level on how they may choose to deploy the money they receive and additional funds they have to be able to provide services. And I get the award for the first dog to participate in the WebEx. This is really important to understand. This kind of work has impact throughout the chain of services provided by governments and other organizations. We anticipate that this work and future iterations of this work may create algorithms that would have greater use at the local and state level than they would by ACL or by CMS. So understanding that one of the things that we've learned from this is that the outcomes of this specific project the outputs of this specific project were in fact different than we expected and had different areas where the benefit might actually accrue.
Okay, so I had to turn my camera off because I got messages. So can you hear me? You still so I have about 7 more additional slides, so we're doing well on time. So we have 2 west, right? We have a phase 2, which we're in right now. We're in a little bit of information we are with, and then we also have sort of the component of where we'd like to see work go. So you will see that we are doing
Stephanie, we're losing you.
Yeah, I'll try and jump in and fill in where technology is depriving us of Stephanie's insight. So what's next is that we have decided that we want to continue to look at county level data based on the initial results that we have. We see that there's potential value in additional work at looking at the county as a geographic unit for identifying potential risk factors, both community level risk factors and individual level risk factors, which is the incorporation of additional data. Phase 2 is looking at being able to acquire data from CMS, Medicare, and Medicaid data that is tied to individual states' adult protective service information. that would allow us to be able to ascertain whether or not there are patterns in payment and engagement that can be related to an individual's encounters with state and local adult protective service agencies, where there's the suspicion, where there's the allegation of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and the substantiation of that. This has been the individual part of that desire for individual level data is being driven by our partners at CMS. They have been encouraging an understanding of this, because that has an impact for them on payment model, potential ways that they're looking at their own data and how funds may be allocated based on these kinds of results. Stephanie, are you back? I think we're going to go with no on that one. One of the things that we talked about was
Hi,
how
Scott, can you hear me?
I can, yes. You
Yay!
called in. You called in.
I had to call in. I have lost the internet, so no problem. Can
right,
you just update me on what slide you're on?
Yeah, I went through the what's next slide, and we're now on slide 32, phase 2.
Oh, okay. Have you started that one yet?
I had just gone to that slide.
Okay, so I can just touch on this real quick, and then Scott can fill in because I can't really see much. But so one thing you will see on this slide is a series of little numbers in a box, right? So I'm going to explain this really quick. So after we had our first research question and we thought about where we could go next to understand and be able to predict abuse, neglect, and exploitation, we understood that the question really broke down into 2 buckets. Questions that are related to adult protective services, which are the first 2 columns, and then general maltreatment questions. The numbered boxes indicate the area of interest or priority that we wanted to tackle and what we could achieve with the time frame that we had. There's 3 sources of data. We could get survey data, you see at the bottom of the slide. We can get data from states in the middle row, and then we can also have national data. So it was pretty clear to us, however, that to answer the question, we really wanted to get here at the middle row. We really wanted to look at, can we predict who that interacts with APS is likely to be found to have experienced abuse, neglect, and exploitation? Can we look and see if we can predict involvement? Are there factors that those who've been involved with APS have that those who are not involved with APS do not have? And then we would like to know is, can you look at the general population and identify who might be likely abused and don't have any APS involvement? And for us to do that, we need to work with states and get state data, which we're doing. We'll show you more as we go along. But our first priority question is in row 1. Secondly, we want to look at predicting substantiation, and that can act as a control for what we do in row 2. We also want to look at predicting abuse diagnosis by looking at predominantly CMS data. So what we want to do is look at, are there health characteristics within the CMS data that we see for those who are substantiated or who experience abuse that you don't see with those who aren't known to be victims. And then lastly, we want to be looking at some survey data, looking retroactively. This is sort of like while we're waiting for data, while we're waiting, we don't want to just be waiting. So is there something that we could do in the meantime, looking at survey data from past years? And so that is sort of task number 4 that we are hoping to approach in this phase 2.
So the one thing that I want to add is that again, we've referred to the technical experts panel. some of the decisions that are reflected here are the result of our proposing approaches to the technical experts panel, and with their knowledge and experience, them providing guidance and advice back that confirmed that this approach might have value or this approach might not have value. For those of you who have navigated academia, think of the technical experts panel as a dissertation, your dissertation panel on steroids, because the level of knowledge and expertise by many of the people is really incredible and have been invaluable in helping us shape this work. Would you agree with that, Stephanie?
Oh, absolutely. I would on Uber steroids.
You know, mice work better if you're in the right window. So we presented what the phase 1 research question was. For phase 2, we're really considering 3 research questions, which were Stephanie introduced in the previous slide. We're looking at substantiation being predicted and whether or not there is the potential to identify risks for recurrence. We're also looking at ways that referral to APS may be predicted at the individual level by other factors that we don't currently know or understand. And then is it possible to look for patterns and risk factors that allow an individual's risk for abuse, neglect, and exploitation to be predicted? In a lot of ways, this is a really ambitious programmatic and research agenda, but it's incredibly important. Steph, do you want to keep going?
You're good on. I don't have anything to add on this slide. Tell me when you advance.
I've advanced. We're on justification and potential use cases.
I'm sorry. Okay, so why all these research questions? Why are we tackling these 3 huge ones? Well, you know, they might appear nuanced, but they actually tell us very different things about an individual's experience with abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And all 3 of those questions speak to different times when we can intervene earlier to prevent it, right? So once you get to APS, that usually means that's pretty egregious. That's pretty bad. That everybody, not everybody, but you know, a number of people, or at least one, has determined that this is so bad that we need to call Adult Protective Services for the state to get involved. Can we predict that and maybe intervene earlier before it reaches that point? And then we just keep wanting to move upstream. So these 3 questions allow us to move back upstream. So it'll help us understand cases that have that higher risk of negative outcomes, and it can help us flag things that need additional attention early. However, this in no way can be used for triaging cases that get referred or to deny services to clients, because again, this is a predictive model. It is not to be used as like a screening tool. Our intent is the information that comes from this would be that confirmation for an individual that yes, your hunch that something is going on might be accurate. So let's not ignore this and let's act on it. Let's do something. Let's try to get involved. Scott, you can do the algorithm.
I'm gonna move us. Oh, okay. I'm gonna move us forward if I get in the right window. So again, we want to explain the approach that we're using to algorithm development. We will once again use machine learning practices. They will again be supervised. I personally am very uncomfortable with unsupervised machine learning. We will use it, but it's always going to be in the context of, are we seeing bias? Are we seeing are the patterns that we see not reflective of what subject matter experts know with regard to the data that's being assessed and evaluated? To be honest, we were relatively light in the use of AI and machine learning in phase 1 of PRAM. Phase 2 of PRAM is going to be looking at we're looking at significantly larger amounts of data. We have states that have volunteered to participate with us. The total population of those states is on the order of 50 million people. We looked at less, and that will be the number of individuals who will be considered, although the number of older adults and people with disabilities in those states is significantly smaller. But we're actually working with truly large data sets in PRAM 2, whereas in PRAM 1, we were looking at much smaller data sets. We will need to use more powerful tools. Unsupervised learning is part of it. None of that will ever go without significant engagement and questioning of any of the results that we receive. Steph, we moved on to the next slide, data supporting individual level risk prediction.
Yeah, so we are obtaining a significant amount of CMS data. It is not the most painless process we've experienced, but we are making progress. So that is incredibly positive. And I will say, this will be the very first time that we understand CMS data to be used in this way to understand this phenomena. So again, very exciting work. Definitely the state APS data. And we are looking at the National Violent Death Reporting System out of CDC to understand in what ways we might be able to understand, learn more about the phenomena. So deaths related to abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And there are, CDC has been asking the medical examiners to identify, for instance, if someone is dying or has died of sepsis, and they're of a certain age, or they have some ambulatory limitations, can you assess whether that is a bed sore that is, the size of a golf ball or a soccer ball? What could be the cause of the sepsis, and could it be tied to, for instance, neglect? So we're hoping we need to explore that more. But these are examples of the primary data sets we'll be looking at for individual level. And the next slide, for me, is the most exciting.
And one thing, Stephanie, if I can add, one thing to note is that this is work that ACL can't do alone. The nature of our relationships with our grantees doesn't provide us the information that we need to be able to do this. This really requires ongoing and consistent collaboration with our partners at CMS and CDC. Stephanie and I have been working with folks at the Department of Justice to be able to have access to data sets that they collect through a variety of their different program areas. We depend on the work that Commerce does to be able, through the Census Bureau, to be able to use American Community Survey data, which gives us foundational information about populations in the United States. Do you want to keep going on the community level data?
No, we could talk hours about each of these. So the only thing I will add, I apologize, I do have something. The only thing I will add is that we are trying to expand upon what we learned in phase 1. So for instance, we understood that food was impacted abuse, neglect, and exploitation growth rates. And so we're trying to pull in more sources. of food access to see if we can tease out what the relationship might be.
And we always end with this. Any organization, federal, state, and local, that wants to partner with us, we're delighted to engage. This is, I think, Stephanie and I believe in the importance of this work. ACL leadership believes in the importance of this work. We are always looking for opportunities to partner with any organizations that are interested in working with us. We don't, Todd, there's not an intentional exclusion of industry partners. And actually, we've recently been, a couple of folks have suggested that there may be value in looking at EHR data, de-identified, to potentially identify patterns and risks for individual encounters that might not be reported to CMS through their payment and engagement data. So this is work that depends on participation outside of ACL, and we really encourage you to join us in this work.
And of course, you could contact me or Scott, or for more direct, more direct engagement, you can contact Nicole, Dr. Fettig, and she would be thrilled to speak with anybody who's interested in learning more about the project or participating.
And with that, we're done. And it's time for questions beyond the ones that are in the chat. Nancy, how do you generally go about encouraging people to ask questions and allow them to?
Todd, how do you want to handle this? We've encouraged people to use the chat box, or are we allowing them to unmute and ask questions directly, Todd?
I was going to say, let's start with the chat box, and I'm trying to turn my video back on, but it's not letting me, but I am here.
So I've got it. And so the very first question was, will the, one question that may not have been investigated in phase one, how geographic dependent or independent were the findings? Meaning, did the risk factors that led to A&E in one community group, say individuals with disabilities, occur at similar rates across counties with similar rates of A&E growth?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So Microsoft, when they were partnering with us in phase one, that is one of the things that they explored further. So with the BCT model identified, as you've said, just the overall, here are factors. And then Microsoft went in to look at it at each of the county levels that we could with the information. And there is variance and difference. And that is one area of follow-up that we do want to do. We're still figuring out if that's appropriate at our level, for us to do within this agency, or do we partner with the states? We're still trying to figure that one out, but absolutely, that is definitely an avenue of exploration that we see is rich.
So another question is, were the project program algorithms developed completely from scratch, or some baseline taken from existing programs? And a follow-up, is the data used from all of your sources organized using time and geographic dimensions, and how often is it updated? I'll answer the second one first. Most of this data is reported on an annual basis, at least the data that was used in Pram 1. The nature of the information is generally related to federal program performance reporting. In the namer's case, it's directly related to federal program performance reporting cycles. In many of the states, in many of the ACS data is also annual. As we move into Pram 2, some of the data that we are looking at will not be annual. It will be specific. It will be specifically located in time. One of the challenges that we have is particularly at the national level, we really do look retrospectively. We're not looking at data that is being constantly updated. It is really point in time data. It is always retrospective. As Stephanie alluded, one of the areas that we expect that state and local governments, as we start to make some of these algorithms available and the results of this work, may want to start looking to apply them to data that is more timely, that has shorter intervals of reporting.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to say that for PRAM 2, even for those data sets that we will be using again, we are asking for the most, whatever years we're missing. So for instance, with CMS, even we are hoping to get 7 years of data, though we don't have 7 years for namers, because as we will be getting it. So we are trying to be as recent as possible, and we are updating data sets as much as we can.
And then the first part of the question, yes, the tools that we used had been previously developed and identified. A lot of them came, many of the tools and practices that we use came from BCT's prior experience and engagement with looking at risk factors associated with child abuse and neglect and other kinds of social service interventions. So that they existed previously and they were modified for our use. And Microsoft had some, when Microsoft were reviewing, they brought in their own set of existing pieces. We anticipate, and this is where, I want to make sure that as we get a body of knowledge from this, that we're able to identify and provide some of those tools in a way that others are able to use them so that they'll be able to take a look at them and apply them with appropriate constraints. One more. Yes, the slides are going to be available. I'll be sending a copy without notes to Todd and Nancy, and I think that they'll be able to distribute to anyone who participated.
We also will be publishing results from the studies, but we are still trying to wrap up our big, boring government report from which we will extract information and write articles, and we can share those when they're ready.
And Nancy, you also said that you're recording this for ACT-IAC, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And how will that go out to this group if they'd like it?
I will post a copy of this video on YouTube and send a link to the whole health COI distro list.
Thank you. And Scott and Stephanie, there's an additional question at the end here. How are your projects, lessons learned, and progress being shared across the Octaves? And how can they capitalize on your experience?
So
great. So I can speak program, Scott, you can do. Okay, and then it'll be quick. So for adult maltreatment, we have both a federal interagency working group and we have an HHS internal working group on adult maltreatment. And we've been keeping them apprised of the project as we've gone along and have a lot of interest from a number of different government agencies and working on this issue in particular. Scott, do you want to add to that?
And I saw Kevin Duvall's on the call. Susan Jenkins, who's our chief performance officer, and I presented information about how ACL uses data to the HHS Data Governance Board, and we presented a little tiny sliver of this work to them. I'm certainly available, and I would invite Stephanie and others to present to the HHS CIO Council from the technology perspective. There has been a pretty significant interest in how, amongst the technology community, and how to be able to use tools like cloud computing, to use tools like AI and machine learning. And we may be the smallest of the Octaves, but I think we have a pretty good story to tell on how we've been able to bootstrap our way into pretty significant accomplishments with very targeted investment of time and energy to be able to use those tools effectively.
Very good. Let me ask you a sort of a bigger, broader brushstroke questions around what is the visibility or drive from the executive branch or other leadership to make this a prominent, high priority issue, and B, what does funding look like stemming from that, of course, whether it's under the recent relief bill or perhaps in the future?
Oh, can I go first, Stephanie, and you can follow up?
Oh, please do.
So we have briefed our executive leadership on this. There is significant interest in this work. We in particular have support of Stephanie's manager, Hillary Dalen, and Edwin Walker, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Aging. There is interest in this work more broadly within ACL that is trying to identify ways in which we can use data available from our programs to identify the importance and efficacy of the work that we're doing through our grant programs. The rescue plan has language that we have taken to plan for parts of PRAM 3, a set of research questions that we would be addressing in the future, that specifically we're looking at how to be able to get information about that occurred during 2020 and 2021, and be able to compare the risk factors and the known incidents of abuse, neglect, and exploitation with prior years to be able to see if the pandemic had an impact on the rate and type of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So we're already anticipating, based on language in the rescue plan, that we need to be preparing for and doing additional work using this kinds of data and practice.
Great. Is there a particular document that people might reference out there that either the Administration for Community Living has out there on a website or elsewhere, just for people to learn more?
So we do have a very brief, oh, I can't get on the internet right now. We do have a very brief description of the project on one of ACL's web pages, and Scott, you can share that. And we intend to expand that once we finish our final report on the first phase of the project. We will be updating it. And we plan to keep that very dynamic. So as we learn more things, we will be posting it on that page.
Thank you. And I think my last question here, seeing none others in the chat, is getting back to the earlier part of your discussion around AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. What would you say is, if you had to pick one thing that is the most important thing that you're hoping to use those technologies and processes to resolve, what would that be? Like, where are you most challenged in trying to make that effective? Maybe is a better way to word that question.
Oh, but Todd, that's a really good question. It's a very hard question. There are so many issues with regard to abuse, neglect, and exploitation that might be amenable to support from AI and machine learning, that it's really hard to give one answer. I'll tee up a response for Stephanie. The field that supports practices to prevent and reduce the impact of abuse, neglect, and exploitation lacks many tools because of resource constraints, because of some of the difficulty of being able to develop models that say, hey, this person's at greater risk than another, or this intervention might have more benefit than the others. So the work that we're trying to do is build a foundation for the practice to have access to those tools. And that's where I hand it over to Stephanie.
Yeah, that's excellent, Scott. Adding to that is that for so long, when we talk about interpersonal violence, we are focused on the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, and we don't look to see what other circumstances might be impacting the person and their environment, to borrow from my social work background. So I relate this, or I make the analogy to both, for instance, heart attack, the risk for heart attack, which is for a lot of people, it's very easy to understand the health and public health factors about that. But I also associate or make it the analogy to gang violence, both of them together, that we understand there's individual factors that if we see that if we intervene early and go in a different direction with heart attack, cholesterol and high blood pressure, we can prevent that heart attack from ever happening. So in one aspect, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to identify those people who are at risk. But secondarily, when you look at gang violence, there's both individual and community factors that can be put in place to reduce gang violence and the occurrence of gangs in communities. So what we are hoping to do is stop looking at the victim, only the victim, also look at the perpetrator, and also take responsibility as a community that there are social determinants of health that we need to be more aware of, and not just health in the traditional sense, but the public health model and the impact of violence on folks. So that's the programmatic wish list.
and again, the last tie back, these problems are not amenable to conventional technology solutions. You do need to have large sets of data. You do need to use tools that previously haven't been used, and that's how AI and machine learning can come into play. And I want to put in the semicolon with the appropriate protections for personal privacy and personal agency and considerations of people's decision on how they wish to live their lives. This should not be seen as the kind of work that leads to interventions that are not driven by the individual. All of this has to be considered in the context of people making choices that they have agency for.
And I know that we could probably keep talking, as you said, at the top for a day or two on all this. So we'll halt it there. I want to leave a few minutes for us to talk about our community of interest group, which you're both welcome to join. But I thank you both for your passion that you share with us today, your drive to make meaningful change here, the potential for technology, and really the application of technology you're already showing is making an impact. I'll follow up with you both. Just something that Bobby Sachs and I and the rest of our community of interest are trying to do is to build an informal group of advisors, and I'd like to invite you both to be a part of that, which really wouldn't take time, but it gives us a mechanism to circle back with you to look at topics that would be of interest to you for us to discuss here with our community of interest. Bobby, if you're out there, do you have anything to add before we turn over to our COI update here with Elijah Biggs?
Thanks, Todd. Just a real big thank you, Stephanie, Scott. What a great presentation and thought-provoking, especially as you got into the weeds of bringing this to life. A lot of times when we were discussing these kinds of things, we're like, oh yeah, we'll do AI or we'll do predictive analytics, but the work that it takes to get to the right answer or the really good answer, y'all did a fantastic job today of helping us to understand that. Truly do appreciate it. Scott's mention of our advisory panel, we're always looking for good, smart people who can help us be better. This COI is about 18 months old, and we have continued to grow. And some of these sessions we have had speakers and many participants, and we're looking to continue to do that. We'd welcome your input either on a formal or informal basis. And finally, just thank y'all again for your time today and for this presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I wanted to also especially thank you because from coming from the program side, a lot of my colleagues do not understand what technology, the benefit, and how it can be helpful. So I do a lot of that education as well. But honestly, in working with some of the other technology groups, they don't understand how this works together. And we could not be doing this without Scott and his team and bringing those technology tools to bear on this project. It would just be impossible. So I appreciate the opportunity to really thank you all for your interest in these topics.
Well, thank you. And as Todd said, we've got a little business to do here in the last few minutes. Y'all are welcome to stand by, or y'all have a fantastic afternoon. Thanks again.
I'll hang out. Thank you again for the invitation.
You're welcome.
So do we want to turn it over to Elijah Biggs as part of our leadership team with the Health Community of Interest. And Elijah, you have a few points to share about some interesting upcoming events, please.
Yep, I'm out here. Can you hear me, Todd?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Terrific. Thank you both. And thank you again to Scott and Stephanie for sharing today. I put it in the chat, but it's worth noting again. Really fascinating and tremendously important research. Thank you for taking on the mission and taking the time out of your day to share it with us. There are three major updates from the COI. I'll cover the first two, and I'll hand it over to our industry vice chair, Jimmy Bonani, to take on the third. So the first of which is that we have our next member meeting in less than a month. It's on April 15th from 12 to 1:30 with the HHS Acting Chief Data Officer, Kevin Duvall, who I heard was out here today on the session, potentially scoping out the competition for next month. So we look forward to inviting Kevin next month, and please join us for that session. It should be a very interesting one. The second is that the Health COI has just launched its own LinkedIn page. And I see that Nancy posted, nope, that was a different link. So I'll go ahead and post the LinkedIn URL into the chat. My call to action is that the folks who have joined today, go out and follow us on LinkedIn, to where we'll be posting and promoting this community and the work that we do. And I'd also like to just give a big shout out to our comms chair, Kelly Wenner, for managing this page. So that's the second. Please take that opportunity to go ahead and click on the URL and follow the page. And then last, Jimmy, if you're out there, could you share out any updates related to the VA project?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Elijah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jimmy Bonani. I'm the vice chair for the Health Community of Interest. And we've been discussing a potential opportunity to collaborate. And one of the aspects of the community's interest that's really powerful is the collaboration with the federal partners and the industry to work on a meaningful, kind of impactful projects. And we had one earlier this year with OKMEC from the HHS. And the next one we have is with the VA, with the Chief Data Officer, Shamendra Paul, and a few others. And we've had a few conversations around that, and there is some traction on that, and we've asked for call for volunteers. And so the project stems around two main concepts, one around the creation and the strategy around synthetic data as the VA begins to mature and is maturing a lot of their data practices. One area that they're looking to get some insights in is around synthetic data, and the other is around authoritative data systems and sources and what that looks like, and how does that factor into the larger transformation that the VA is going through. So those two areas are of keen interest for Shamendra and some of his peers. And so we've had the opportunity to meet with them several times, think through a little bit of that. We've disseminated that information to the community of interest in terms of if there's volunteers who'd like to lend their time and expertise. And so we are in the process of finalizing a kickoff for that. So if you've already volunteered, you'll be included on that kickoff call with the VA. If you haven't volunteered and it seems interesting, please reach out to Nancy or myself, and we can get you added to the list. And look for a kickoff call, I think in early April, where we'll have the VA discuss some of the things that they're looking for. And then after that, we'll have a more internal focus meeting with the members to understand who's available and expertise to support and in creating a meaningful, valuable product or a process or whatever the output may be for the VA. So this is a very exciting and new opportunity for really for us to collaborate and bring our expertise to help some of these challenging government mission problems. So if any questions, I'm happy to address them now, or please reach out.
Jimmy, thank you. Elijah, thank you. Any questions from anybody else on the phone before we wrap up?
Not a question, but just wanted to say again, we've got Kevin Duvall, acting CDO, coming up in April, and he was on earlier at my invite to come in, and he had not participated in one of our COI meetings, and I've already gotten some feedback from him that he liked what he saw and he's looking forward to the meeting. So please get the word out, make a LinkedIn post, let your friends know, and join us next time.
And Bobby, I think it's a fair ask of the team here. If people have particular topics, maybe they'd like to submit to Kevin prior to that, we can do so, right?
Oh yeah, definitely so.
So if folks are keenly interested in this, you can send a note to me, to Bobby, or to Nancy Delanoche at ACT-IAC, and we can aggregate them and maybe give something to Kevin to chew on before that next session. Other than that, I am impressed that we are right on time here. Scott and Stephanie, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. Thank you everyone for participating, and we will circle back in April. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.